The overpriced seller is the best lead in your pipeline. It's not the motivated one. It's not the guy or the gal that's going to call you back in 10 minutes and say, hey, make me an offer I can't refuse. Not the delusional one. It's the storage owner that's asking $1.2 million for a facility that might only be worth $700,000 or $800,000. And I know how that sounds. I know right now you're probably wanting to like shut off this video because like, who is this guy with the Cuban accent? Has no idea what he's talking about. Stay with me for about 12 to 15 minutes. And I'm going to show you why most of the deals that I've done started right there. Okay, now last week, a member of our Storage Wins coaching community named Carolina posted this. And she posted inside of our private community and she asked a question with 5 options. She said, what do you do with a significantly overpriced for sale by owner lead? Essentially, I know in the residential world, we refer to FSBOs. She used for sale by owner, but she's talking in the context of a self-storage facility. And she said, what do you do with a significantly overpriced for sale by owner storage lead that you sourced yourself? Now, she didn't pay for it. She found it. This is not from a broker. This is direct to seller. And here were the options. She said, option 1, you post it in a Facebook group. Option 2 is you hand it over to a broker, maybe a referral. Maybe you just want to like contribute and add value and give them a lead. Option 3 is you give the sellers a broker's contact information. You're essentially like a connector. Option 4 is you file it away in a folder or in your CRM and you call it overpriced deals. And then the 5th option was you follow up in a few months. Now, there was a flurry of comments that followed. One of the things inside of our Storage Wins community, it's just very, very active. People are very, very connected. People are always contributing, pouring into each other. And there were several people that voted and significantly more that commented. People that own hundreds and hundreds of storage units jumped in with real answers. People that are actively pursuing their very first storage deal jumped in with their thoughts and perspective. And here's the thing. Every single one of those 5 options assumes the same thing. And that assumes that it's a dead end, that the lead doesn't really have any life. And that's just not the case. Now, before I go any further, I want you to understand something really, really important. If you're doing your own marketing, and that could be direct mail, which is one of my favorite, that could be cold calling, that could be jumping into Facebook Marketplace and messaging owners, that could be flying for dollars on Google Earth or on Google Maps. Most of the sellers that you talk to are either not going to be interested in selling, and if they are, they're going to want a premium. In other words, it's going to be overpriced, at least on paper or verbally. And that's not a bug in your system. That's the job of the system. All right. Now, yes, you want to uncover the opportunities, but one of the things I shared with Carolina is that if you adjust your mindset and go from expecting an owner to just hand you a deal on a silver platter to the mindset that we don't find deals, we actually create them, then the game is going to change for you, especially when you do it consistently over time. Now, think about who actually calls you back. Okay, it's not the storage owner who already has talked to numerous storage brokers. They've done their homework. They know exactly what the facility is worth based on the revenue it's producing, based on the revenue it could be producing. It's the owner that's calling you that hasn't really thought through this before. Maybe he had a conversation at a coffee shop with somebody. Maybe he saw some appraisal from years ago. Maybe he's just very, very uninformed. In fact, that's what I find most of the time. You know, owners that own these facilities for decades, maybe they built it themselves. And that owner's got a number in his head. Despite the fact that they tell you that they don't have a number, I guarantee you they have a number in mind. And that could have come from a conversation with a broker, a friend, another storage owner, who knows? It doesn't make them greedy to want the most amount of money for a facility. In fact, I totally get it. I've been there. I've been the guy who's managed and operated a storage facility for years and then has decided to sell it. It doesn't make them greedy. It oftentimes just makes them uninformed. And an uninformed storage owner, especially one that it's not rooted in reality, they haven't done their homework, they haven't talked to several storage brokers, maybe they've gotten some random cold calls along the way, and it inflates the perceived value in their mind because they have the hot piece of cake that everybody wants. Okay, what's lacking is a relationship with you. And I think that's the single most important, valuable thing in this business. This entire business is built on the backbone of relationships. And the foundation of those relationships is meaningful conversations. It's one of the things we talk a lot about inside of our Storage Wins community. And that's what this video is about. Now, I want to get tactical with you, and I want to show you what you actually do with all these overpriced opportunities, or in some people's minds, lack thereof. All right. Now, I want to go ahead and shift for a moment, and then I'm going to tie it together. And this video is going to be broken down in several sections. And my job is to hopefully have it come together for you so that you understand that you have deals in your CRM, you have deals in your database, on your spreadsheet, or on your sheet of paper, if you are working it consistently. And this video is really going to help you uncover some of those opportunities. Now, I want to walk you through using this exact thread that Carolina, her question with the poll and all the comments, because what happened in there is worth as much as the answer itself. And now she posted this, I want to say roughly about a week or so ago, maybe a week and a half ago. I was just traveling Europe with my family and just got back into town. And there was so much activity in this one question that I thought I'd create a video on this. And to Carolina's credit, she actually gave me permission to share this with her, or to share this with you, I should say. So she posted this, I believe, on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, she had answers from so many community members. And what's interesting is that there was a lot of overlap, but they were all looking at it from a different angle, from a different lens, a different perspective, right? I think about somebody like Joe in our community who was thinking about it in terms of the DSCR, and that is the debt service coverage ratio that a bank is going to require. So if a bank is generating, if the debt service on a loan for a storage facility is $100,000 a year, most banks are going to want to know that that facility is generating $125,000 to $130,000 of net operating income. So basically a 1.25 to 1.3 debt service coverage ratio is what most banks want. Now, Chris, who owns and operates facilities in smaller markets, I'm talking about Casey and Kenny and Chuck and Cynthia, several people, some of which already own storage facilities. Okay, these are not gurus, these are not educators, these are just in the trenches storage owners, people that were adding a lot of insight and perspective. And Cynthia, one of my favorite comments in there was, she said, "Hey, is there an option for all the above?" Because Carolina was looking at this and she was looking for one specific answer. But there wasn't just one answer. And the answer oftentimes in storage is it depends. And sometimes when I share that, people kind of laugh because it does depend. And, you had a room full of self-storage investors and owners and operators, and nobody could really agree on the direct answer. Now, everybody did agree that the last option of following up is always a good idea. Okay, you have to have a follow-up system. But if you don't know what to do here, you're not slow, okay? Like, nobody knows this stuff, because if you haven't experienced this, if you haven't been taught this, then how would you know? So let me have you think through the decision tree here, a framework, okay? Now, I mentioned Joe, and Chris was another one. Chris is a very successful storage owner operator. Both of these guys shared their perspective from the calculator's lens. In other words, the debt service coverage ratio. And one of the things Joe shared was, hey, don't debate the seller. Okay, so you're never going back and forth to the seller, because when you push, what is somebody going to do? They're going to want to lean in and push back. Okay, so oftentimes I think what you need to do is lean on the spreadsheet, lean on the calculator, and explain to the seller how you're coming up with the value for their facility. So that way you're not debating with the seller. You're letting the calculator do the heavy lifting for you. It's basically a math equation. It's just a formula. And for some people that can work depending on the owner's personality type. Okay, now what you don't want to do is insult the owner, because keep in mind, oftentimes these storage owners have owned these facilities for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. It's their life's work, and they value it more than what the revenue says the facility's worth. But the math is the math. Your idea here and the way you want to approach this is not in a combative, trying to justify your number and discredit their number. It's to figure out how you can partner with that seller and align with the seller and see if you can get them to see it from your perspective, but not even really your perspective, the calculator's perspective. Blame the bank. The bank is the one requiring a debt service coverage ratio of 1.25 or 1.3. And that's where Chris took it a level higher. Okay. He said, it's not even your calculator, it's the lender's, right? And one of the things he shared was our lending partner has to underwrite to a minimum debt coverage ratio. Okay. And that's, some banks are going to be 1.2, many banks are going to be 1.25, 1.3. And that's based on their underwriting. Okay. So the loan simply won't support the asking price. And you have to explain to these sellers, hey, Mr. Seller, I'm going to go to a bank and I'm going to get a loan for 70 or 75% of the purchase price. A bank is not going to lend it to me if I can't get this debt service coverage ratio to work. Right? So you see what just happened there? Like, you didn't become the villain, the bank did. Okay? It's you and the seller versus the bank. And it's all about how you frame this conversation. And now you and the seller are sitting on the same side of the table. Okay? You're working together side by side. It's not across from each other in a combative way. That's a completely different conversation than, hey, Mr. Seller, you're nuts. Your price is too high. Or how did you even get to that number? You're at 1.2. The facility's worth 700,000. Like, how could I possibly pay your 1.2? Casey was somebody in our community who kind of said it in plain English. And honestly, I'd kind of steal it word for word. He said, tell the seller, hey, for every dollar that I borrow, the bank's going to want $1.25 of profit after expenses and after the debt service, so that my offer isn't just an opinion. It's just a math equation. Okay. My offer isn't an opinion. It's a math equation, and share that with them. Now, keep in mind, I think tonality matters and how you have this conversation with the seller matters. This is not the type of conversation I'm having in the first couple of minutes of first time I speak to an owner. I would have already asked some questions, built some rapport, gotten the seller doing 80%, 90% of the talking, while I do 10 to 20% of the talking, right? So you want to listen more than you talk. And then moving on, there's a conversation that needs to be had about the expense ratio of these storage facilities. Understand that these mom and pop storage owners, their expense ratio, more times than not, is going to be far less than yours. Why? Because you're probably going to be managing this property remotely. Okay. You are probably paying more than what this storage owner paid for. Okay. So their basis is significantly less than yours, which means their taxes are lower, their insurance is lower. They're probably managing the property themselves, where you're not. You're going to have a boots on the ground. You might even have a third-party management company. You're probably going to be spending money on marketing, where they're probably not spending money on marketing. So you have to explain to the seller that because you don't live there and you're not going to manage it yourself, you're going to incur more expenses. Because you're buying the facility for more than what they likely paid for it, your basis is going to be higher, which means your taxes and insurance are going to go up. And it's very hard for them to argue that logic because it just makes sense. Okay. And oftentimes I think the biggest disconnect isn't the price, it's the expenses. Okay. Think about who you're buying from. These mom and pop storage owners, again, like I said, have owned these for decades. Oftentimes they run it on a flip phone, on some Post-it notes, on general ledgers. I mean, old school, old school, old school. The nephew might mow the grass, or they might do it themselves. There's no management in place. So expense ratios are really low. I've seen expense ratios that owners show me of 15% or 12%, right? You're never going to achieve that. Or I hate to speak in absolutes, but it's very unlikely. Okay. When you come along and underwrite it like a business, you're going to add a management fee because you might live 300 miles away. You're going to add reserves because the roof might be 18, 20, 25 years old. You're going to pay for marketing, okay? Because you might not know everybody in town. You might not be part of the good old boys network or club. Your expenses are going to go up. The net operating income is going to come down, which means the value is going to come down. And they might think you're lowballing them if you don't give them this context, if you don't explain to them why your expenses are going to be higher. Okay. Now, I think it's super, super important that you understand oftentimes it's not a negotiation problem. It's you having to educate the seller and walk them through this process. And a way that you might frame this is say, hey, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, is like, listen, I want you to understand I'm not questioning your numbers. In fact, if I were in your shoes, I would want to get as much as I could for the facility. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you've owned this for X number of years. I'm certain you've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. Clearly you've done a great job with you. Like, I completely understand where you're coming from, but I just want to explain to you what it's going to actually cost me to run this storage facility if you and I were to come to an agreement. And I'm not sure if we could. I understand you're looking to get a certain amount of money. I just don't know that I'm going to be able to get there because I don't live down the street or in that market like you do. And so on and so on. Now, obviously you want to dress this up in your voice. What I just shared is not a magic script. I'm just kind of like speaking from the heart. I'm seeking to connect with that person. And I'm seeking for them to see it from a different lens. But notice what I did. I complimented them. I was empathetic. I understood why they wanted that. I wasn't saying, hey, you're a moron for wanting double the actual value of the facility. Like, I'm not insulting them. Okay. Now I want to kind of shift and share with you the thing that nobody answered. And I want you to watch what happens here, because this is the part that I really want you to see. Okay. And everybody gave a great answer. And like I said, a lot of unique insight and perspective. There was some overlap. And everybody was focusing on proving that the seller is overpriced. And one of the things that Carolina did was she actually went in there and commented twice. And she says, I've been doing that. My question is more like, what happens when they don't budge? Like, what she was really trying to figure out is like, hey, when you explain to the seller that your expenses are going to be higher, and when you explain to them the debt service coverage ratio and your math equation, your formula, and you want to dumb it down and keep it simple. You don't want to speak in technical terms or jargons, but Carolina was doing a great job of explaining that to them, but she was getting a little bit frustrated because they wouldn't budge. They were still stuck on their number. And then she actually repeated it again because everybody kept giving her similar feedback. And nobody got defensive, right? But they just didn't understand her question. And that's one of the reasons I was inspired to create this video, because if she's having this challenge and she's putting the work in, you might be thinking the same thing. And I know for certain if you're looking at deals, you probably feel like every deal out there is overpriced, okay? But I want to challenge you to shift your thinking from expecting people to just hand you deals at a 10 cap or a 12 cap. Right? Like, we don't find deals, we create them. And that could be through our offer, our structure. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyways, I ended up chiming in there. And look, here's the truth. Everybody in this business had a great answer for how to justify your number. But there wasn't very many that had an answer for what happens when the seller hears your number and they don't care. They want what they want. And that's where I jumped in and I shared that you need to stop focusing on the price. Because I've shared this in other videos and in the Storage Wins podcast on my personal Facebook page, that I will more times than not give the seller their price as long as they let me control and dictate the terms. And I'm talking about the interest rate. I'm talking about the loan term, right? The length of the loan. And I'm talking about the down payment. I will always, or more times than not, give you whatever price you want as long as you give me the terms, right? Seller's price, your terms. And price is what they're dead stuck on. Whenever I hear a seller is particularly stuck on a certain price, which is what happened, by the way, when I bought the Florida facility almost 4 years ago, is the seller was dead set on a certain price. And I realized that I was going to be attempting to shove a circle into a square if I kept trying to beat them down on the price. So I said, no problem. You're looking for X price. And we ended up getting ridiculous seller finance terms. He financed 90% of the purchase price. We got almost a 3%. It was 3.25% fixed interest rate for 5 years. And then we got a built-in extension on that. So terms is how you create deals. Based on that seller's asking price and the revenue it was producing at the time, it wasn't a deal until we created the deal through our structure, through the offer, through the seller financing, the terms of the deal. Okay, so that's what I shared with Carolina in that post. I said, hey, this is one way you can approach it with a seller. Mr. or Mrs. Seller, I understand you really need to get, let's just make up a number, 1.2 million for your facility. And again, if I were in your shoes, I would want to get as much for the facility as possible. And this is where you insert a couple compliments. you've done a great job with this place, etc. It's got to feel natural and genuine. If the place looks like a complete dump, I wouldn't be saying it looks like the Taj Mahal, right? Um, so it's got to be natural. It's got to be something you really feel. Maybe it's a great location. Maybe it's a great market. Like, give them a real compliment. Don't beat down their facility. And if anything, lift it up. And then that's where I shift to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if I could pay you X, and I'm not quite sure that I can, but if I could, would you consider, okay, now consider is an important word here. Would you consider taking payments over time? And then bite your tongue and shut up. Okay. And I'll let them respond. And now let me show you why every word in there is doing a particular job. If I could pay you X, notice what I'm doing there. I'm 1 foot in, but I'm kind of leaning back. I think of a mentor of mine that said, hey, Alex, when you first met your wife, were you like all up in her face? Were you like leaning into her? Were you like aggressive and talking to her like right here, not invading her personal space? Or were you like kind of chill and just leaning back and kind of like you were creating some curiosity, some intrigue? And it was like, no, it was the latter. I was creating some curiosity and intrigue. It's the same thing with the seller here. If I could pay you X, you're not hungry. You're not the motivated buyer. You're not like really, really wanting the deal. And it's what I've shared with my daughter, right? It's like, if you chase the dog's going to run. If you run away from the dog's going to run to you. Same thing here. So you got to play up on some psychology, right? If I could pay you X, you're not agreeing to anything. You don't even know if you're interested in buying the facility based on what they want. You didn't make them an offer. You just kind of floated a possibility by them. And then the next thing, and I'm not sure that I can. Again, I'm leaning back. I'm not leaning in. I'm leaning back. That's the most important part here, is that you're not desperate. You're not chasing the dog. And that starts to flip the script. One of the books behind me that I'd recommend is by an author called Oren Klaff. And his book is Flip the Script. And he talks a lot about that and frame control and the words you use. And they're not magic words. It's psychology. And it's important that you study that. Would you consider, again, is an important phraseology there, if that's the best way to say it. Would you consider? Consider is an important word because now it opens up possibilities. You're not asking them to agree. You're asking them to consider it, to think about it. And then you gave him his number. He won. And that's the guy that's never going to budge. They just won. They got their price as long as you can get terms. And by the way, if you can't get terms, then it might be an opportunity where you build a relationship with a storage broker that you trust, and maybe you can work out some type of arrangement with them. Or maybe you just want to be really, really cool and give them an opportunity and give them a lead and be a connector and deposit and be a contributor, because the laws of reciprocation will always tip back in your favor. It's going to come back around you one way or the other. Maybe depending on, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a CPA, this is not financial or legal advice, but maybe you can get some type of compensation for that, marketing fee or something. Again, check with local state laws, check with the broker, but you might be able to work something out. Or you keep it in your follow-up system. And you're dripping on them every 45 or 60 days with a text message, with a phone call, with an email, with a letter. There's so many different ways to do this, okay? But look, I mentioned Chris, right? One of our community members who's super, super experienced and somebody who's just pouring into our community. Chris bought, I want to say it was almost a 200 unit facility roughly 3 years ago. Super, super small town. That seller was like the guy that was known in the town. Everybody knew him. He kept it full. He charged a little bit under market. The kind of guy that knew everybody, would talk to everybody. He was very hands-on at the facility, had relationships with all the tenants. And so it was a great deal. He got it at a good price and they ended up closing. Here's what happened though. A few months later, tenants started leaving. Now, nothing broke, nothing changed. Chris didn't increase the price. Everything was the same about the deal, except for the seller. The guy they rented from was gone. And that's what Chris didn't know, is that it wasn't just about what he paid for. He can win the price negotiation and completely lose the business. And which is exactly why terms matter, because one of the things Chris shared is that the seller wanted to stay on board, and he should have kept that seller on board because it would have smoothed out that transition. And now he did do seller financing and payments were made over time, but now the seller's got a reason to stick around. And the seller could have been the one introducing people to Chris or Chris's team. And he didn't realize how much of a factor the seller being involved in being so hands-on, the fact that he had built relationship with the tenants was to the success of that business. Okay, so Chris wouldn't have just gotten a discount. He would have bought and built in goodwill into the deal and would have given the seller a reason to want to stick around. And so you have to understand and read the situation. That's why asking questions is going to be your best tool when you talk to storage owners, because when you ask questions and listen, you can gather a lot of information, not just the information that's being shared, but what's not being said. And I think it's super important. Do not feel the need to have every single question answered before you go under contract. In fact, it's a mistake that is made. It's another post in our community that has gotten so many comments and so much engagement. Is so many people, I think, miss out on opportunities because they're trying to dot every single I and cross every single T before they go under contract. And what happens is that somebody else jumps in and takes the deal. Speed wins. And when speed wins and there's speed of implementation, you can uncover the things you don't know during due diligence. Okay, super, super, super important. Okay, so just because, here's the last thing I want to share with you. Okay, and this is probably one of the most important things that you need to hear. Just because a deal is overpriced doesn't mean there isn't an opportunity there. And that's why I wanted to end this video with how I started, that some of your most valuable leads are the ones where the seller might be a little delusional. And I know that sounds crazy, and that's not just some hook. It's when you change your mindset and you start to educate sellers, you have a follow-up system. You have maybe a way that you can add value to a broker and be a connector. Doors start to open up for you that otherwise wouldn't have existed. And not just seeing a deal and say, oh, it's overpriced, I'm going to move on, but educating and walking the seller through the process and still making an offer. If you're not making offers consistently, you're not going to be successful in this business. Okay. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to chase every seller forever. At some point, Joe mentioned this in the post. He's like, look, sometimes I just told him that I'm not the right buyer for your property. I said, I like it. I like the market, but not enough to lose money on the deal. This is the guy that was kind of walking them through the math equation. And then you move on and you keep them in your follow-up system. Understand that there's north of 50,000 storage facilities in this country. Okay. And you're not trying to buy 50,000 facilities, right? You might be looking to buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 deals a year, right? Depending on your goals, depending on your situation. So look, let's bring it back here. The 5 options that were on that poll weren't wrong because the people didn't know what they were talking about. In fact, every single person there knew what they were talking about, and every single insight and response was valuable. But they were approaching it from trying to justify their number and disprove the seller's number and why they were wrong to a certain degree. But it's not about the price. Don't focus so much on the price. If a seller's focused on the price, you need to shift and think of kind of dancing with the seller. If they want to go in a certain direction, let them lead you there. But that's where you introduce terms and potentially seller financing. Okay. So I can promise you that you are probably sitting on leads and opportunities right now that you might have filed away or you haven't been following up because it was overpriced. You thought the seller was crazy. Pull them back out. Okay. Run the analysis, use our quick deal analyzer. And if you don't have that, there should be a link below where you can access that. Our offer range calculator or quick deal analyzer that will tell you quickly within 60 seconds if a deal's worth pursuing or not. And then if it is, how you can quickly come up with an offer range. So massive imperfect action beats another month of research and losing opportunities every single time. Okay. And look at what the conversation that was started out of one post that Carolina shared inside of our community. And then what Joe chimed in and shared, and Casey and Chris and Kenny and so many other people. She didn't get an answer. She got perspective. She got insight. She got a menu of ways to think through this. And then she gets to pick the tools and use that in her next conversation with a storage owner. Okay. And look, that's the kind of thing that you're probably not going to be able to get from a course, and you probably can't get from a book. And hopefully you've gotten this from this YouTube video, but it's so important. And it's something that cannot be understated. It is so important to get in the right room where these types of conversations are happening, where people are challenging you, pushing you, giving you insight, where you post a question and you get a flurry of comments, where you share a challenge and you get an army of people supporting you. That's what the Storage Wins community is. It's people pouring into you. It's people that are there to support you, to guide you, because nobody has all the answers, right? Even I look at storage deals today and I always like to get an extra set of eyes on it because there's so many nuances in these deals. So look, either way, I'm in your corner. Continue to plug in. Make sure that you're subscribed here on the YouTube channel, on the Storage Wins podcast. Send me a friend request on Facebook because I share a lot of content about self-storage there. And if you want to have a conversation to see what our community is about, to see if it's a fit, I would invite you to schedule a short 10-minute call. Head over to storagewins.com/call. And otherwise, continue to stay plugged in here. Remember, speed of implementation. Take something you learn here, dust off those old leads, pick up the phone, send an email, a text message, re-engage the seller, and don't focus so much on their price. Focus on them, their situation, what they're looking to accomplish, and ask yourself, how do I shift from thinking about finding deals to how do I create a deal? So with that being said, I'm signing off. I'll see you on the next one.